Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr. Sarah Davis, and I'm glad you're here. At the Family Enterprise Center at Kennesaw State University, our work centers on educating, supporting, and connecting family business leaders. We know that family business leaders don't always separate work and life as cleanly as they should. So challenges at work often show up at the dinner table, and family dynamics often show up in the workplace. And that is why today's conversation is so important. Mental health is increasingly part of the reality that leaders are navigating. And in family businesses, it can feel especially personal. So today's session is designed to offer clarity, practical guidance, and reassurance by approaching mental health not as something to fear, but as something that we can address thoughtfully and responsibly. We're fortunate to have three experienced professionals joining us, each bringing a distinct and valuable perspective. So we have Cindy Filer, who will share insights from human resources lens on supporting employees and reducing workplace stress. Trisha Earls will help us understand the legal considerations and how to navigate this space with care and compliance. And Victoria Ramsey will ground the conversation in a therapeutic perspective, helping us recognize stress, anxiety, and depression, and what healthy responses can look like. So together, they'll help us think more clearly about how to foster healthier workplaces for our teams, our families, and ourselves. With that, I'm happy to turn it over to our speakers.
Hey everyone, I'm so glad to be with you today. Unfortunately, this seems to be a popular topic, and we don't want it to be a popular topic, but it is. And so, back in long days ago, we would have just not addressed it, right? We would have just kind of shoved it under the rug as employers. We would have not thought about it. But nowadays we understand that if we do that, we're unhealthy and our employees are unhealthy and we as owners are unhealthy, in many cases. So we're excited to give you some content today. We have a kind of a 2-hour presentation that's being put into a 1-hour presentation. So we're going to jump right in, and I am going to introduce myself first, and then I'll have Trisha second, or actually Victoria second and Trisha third. Introduce yourselves. And so I'm Cindy Filer. I own a company called Innovative Outsourcing. We are a recruiting firm that's 30 years old, as well as a fractional human resources firm. We're a family business. We are part of the Family Business Center and have loved the Family Business Center at Kennesaw State and have lots of history there. My son Matt has been in the business with me for this is year 9, going on year 9. So anyway, glad to be here. Victoria, I'll send it to you.
I'm Victoria Ramsey. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've been in private practice for 14 years. All of those 14 years have been in Marietta, Georgia at East West Psychotherapy, but I've recently moved to Auburn, Alabama, in part to be closer to my parents who live in South Alabama, and we maintain a family farm there. So while we're not completely an up and running business, we are a family that has to make decisions together a lot. And so I hope to just bring a mental health perspective to this conversation. Look forward to connecting with you all more.
Trisha?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Trisha Earls. I'm an employment attorney, and I'm with the Hawkins firm. And my practice today is usually advising employers on how to comply with the various laws. Here, we're going to talk about today the Americans with Disabilities Act and how mental disabilities manifest themselves in the workplace and how employers should respond to those things given their legal obligations. So I look forward to speaking with you towards the end of the presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see what we're talking about. And for those of you guys that are in the Family Business Center, can everybody see the screen now? Okay, great. Okay, so why are we talking about this today? Again, I told you it was pretty popular, but here are some stats that I think are pretty important. 75% of workers reporting having at least one mental health challenge sometimes or often in the past year. 88% of employees with mental health issues say that it affects their work life. And again, we're talking about how it affects our work life here on this webinar. Workplace stress affects 81% of employees' mental health. I mean, that is a big, big number. Oops, that is a big, big number. And then this last one in 2023, there were 49,316 suicides. That's more than double the number of homicides in that same year in the United States. So these are the things that we need to think about as we kind of walk through our lives as business owners, our lives as family business owners, or people that work in family business, and what we can do to really positively impact that. Okay. So we're going to spend our time in three buckets today. The first one is, what are mental health issues? And what if I have the issue? What if the issue's mine? And Victoria is going to talk to us about that. And then I'll jump in and talk about how to create a healthy workplace, because I focus more on the HR side of the house. And then Trisha's going to jump in, as she said, and she's going to talk about the legal side of mental health. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Victoria.
Okay, I wanted to let you know that last statistic is really sobering about the suicide numbers. I did check that was from 2023. I did check from 2024, and they saw a decrease by 516, so that was good. And I want to make you aware of at the onset that they don't know if that's a blip on the screen statistically or if we're going to hopefully see a trend going downward. But the 988 is the mental health hotline. And that is a nationwide hotline similar to 911. So I did want to just make sure everyone is aware of that. But first of all, I want to kind of draw a difference as I jump in at the beginning and I'll come back at the end between mental illness and mental health. So mental illness right here refers collectively to diagnosable mental disorders. And these are health conditions involving significant changes in thinking, emotion, and or behavior. And this often includes distress and or problems functioning, social, work, or family activities. So they do have very specific criteria, and we're, as clinicians, I'm looking at duration, I'm looking at onset, I'm looking at what setting does it happen in. We were just talking about sometimes being with family can, cause a lot of emotions to come up. And so as a clinician, when someone comes in and they're like, oh my goodness, I'm just so stressed, and it's right after Thanksgiving and they've been with their family, or right after Christmas, I'm looking to see where else does this show up in their life. So if you look on the screen, I won't read all of these criteria for time, but we are looking for at least 5 symptoms over a 2-week period for a major depressive disorder. And these symptoms that you can see would cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other types of functioning. 7% of adults in the US experience major depressive disorder each year. And then there are other types of depression: dysthymia, postpartum depression, bipolar 1 and 2. So what I want you to gather from this is we throw around a lot of words. Oh, I'm really depressed. I'm really anxious. That's my PTSD acting up. That's my ADHD. But really, there are very specific criteria. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is about anxiety disorders. So this actually affects 19.1% of the US experience an anxiety disorder each year, so much more than depression. And this can be in the form of a generalized anxiety disorder. This is where we see panic attacks and panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. A lot of times we do see this in high functioning executives. Some of the things that make executives very, very conscientious can be driven by an OCD style of thinking, and it can become problematic if it reaches the level of a disorder. Specific phobias like heights or fear of flying, this definitely has affected people's work lives. I had some contact with the fire department, and one of the firefighters struggled with a specific phobia of getting behind the fire truck. And so, yes, that's affecting his work. So we had to look very carefully at, this is an excellent firefighter, but this area needed to be removed from his job description at least temporarily. And then there's post-traumatic stress disorder. And we hear a lot about that. You think immediately of maybe someone who's been involved in combat or someone who's had been exposed to violence or assault. And that is completely true. That can definitely cause post-traumatic stress disorder. One of the majority of cases of PTSD are car accidents, just because that is so common. So that can sometimes people can hear sounds, smell smells, and it can trigger a response of PTSD. So there's a lot of different types of trauma that people are exposed to. And no, everything is not trauma, but that's why it's important to talk with a professional. Substance use. So sometimes we forget about this, but this is directly related to mental health. 16.6% of adults are self-medicating to a level that's reached addiction. So alcohol use disorder is a medical condition characterized by an inability to stop or control alcohol use despite adverse social, occupational, or health consequences. It can be mild, moderate, or severe. So treatment for alcoholism or any type of addiction is really, really important. And when we understand that mental health, mental illness and substance use disorders are just like if a person had any other health condition, it can help demystify it. And hopefully the conversation just nationally is changing. Years ago, people used to think, oh, well, that's just someone who's weak, or they just can't handle it, or it's some moral, maybe they weren't strong enough in their faith or something like this. And we're really seeing, no, we can measure changes in brain chemistry. Our neurotransmitters regulate our mood. We can see on brain imaging that structure and activity in certain areas of our brain increases or decreases based on depression and anxiety. And our genetics and adverse life experiences have been proven that they can definitely increase our risk for mental health disorders, but they don't determine our destiny. The treatment is available and it really is effective.
Great. That's such great information. And the reason we wanted to do that piece up front is because a lot of times an employee will come into one of our offices as an HR professional or you as a business owner, and they're going to say, hey, I'm depressed, or hey, I am anxious, or hey, I need an accommodation because of this. And as Victoria likes to say, just because you're upset for the day doesn't mean that you have a clinical depression diagnosis, right? It has to meet all those criteria that she talked about to actually meet that diagnosis. So just because I've had a bad day, or I have, this week's been hard because I had something happen with a parent or whatever, that doesn't mean that I'm overall depressed and that is clinically given as a diagnosis. So anyway, we wanted to let you know that first, and that the only people that can make that diagnosis are health professionals like Victoria, who's highly trained to do that, or a medical professional similar to a doctor, things like that. We as business owners, HR people, we don't get to make that diagnosis. We don't get to say, I don't think you're depressed. I think you just need some chocolate. Like, I don't think we don't get to do that. So we're going to transition to the workplace because there are some things we don't have control over for our employees, and things that happen outside of the workplace we don't really have any control over, right? We sometimes have to handle the fallout from it, but we don't have a lot of control over it. So we're going to talk about the things that we could have control over. And we're going to talk really quick about creating a healthy culture, setting up programs that are going to help, and how do we train our managers. So first off, we need to create a healthy culture. And to do that, we need to minimize the workplace stressors, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm soft, that I'm, just kind of, oh, she's one of those HR people, so we need to make it a happy workplace that everybody loves and we have no stress. Well, that's not the case. But we need to make sure that the stress is manageable and okay. And so we're going to look at several different factors here. One is workload. I'm just going to give some interesting possibilities. What if in 2025, we know business was hard in 2025. We know that a lot of companies had to either let people go, or when people left attrition wise because they were moving out of state, we maybe didn't backfill their jobs. So what has happened to the remaining employees' workload? Has it increased? Did you used to have 3 people that answered phones and now you only have 2? Is their workload too much? We need to make sure about that. We need to ask the question of these employees, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but we need to say, is your workload adequate? Is it too much, too little? Because sometimes the first time you hear about that is when they quit. Acceptable stress. So, jobs are not all, wine and roses and happy things. So there is stress at work. That is just part of the definition of work. But there's acceptable stress and unacceptable stress. And I like to explain this using, for instance, a CPA firm. So a CPA who has gotten their CPA designation, they go into working for a public accounting firm knowing that January to April is going to be lots of stress, lots of work, lots of overtime. But they also know that after that, it's going to be less, right? And so we call that acceptable stress because they've kind of already counted the cost of that. They know that it's going to be a finite period of time and then it's going to be over, right? And so most people's brains can, and I'm guessing Victoria can, say yes to this. Most people's brains can understand that if I have stress, but I know when it's going to be over, I can get through it. But if you have created an environment for your people, or if you allowed an environment to be created that there's a lot of stress, and that they don't see the end coming, that might be unacceptable stress, and we need to get rid of that. Also, concern over losing their job. I know in 2025, there was just a lot of confusion because of the media, I believe, over, large companies are laying off hundreds of people. And so, the world's coming for your job. But we didn't see as many job losses as it sounded like we would on the news. We did see some, and those are all regrettable. But we need to make sure that our employees are not sitting home at night concerned over their job if your workplace is in fact not a place that's going to let people go. So if you could use KPIs, which are key performance indicators, if you could communicate regularly and often with your employees to let them know that you're safe. We can't guarantee anything, but we don't anticipate losing people, right? Because it's amazing how much people's brain space is their concern of losing their job. Respecting their time outside of work. Normally when we do this topic and I've got, 2 hours, I go more into it, but be very careful to be cognizant of time off, right? So if you give somebody some vacation time and they have PTO and they're away, do not expect them to log in to all the meetings. Do not expect them to pick up the phone and fix something. Do not expect people to get an email at 11 o'clock at night and respond to it, or on the weekends. We need to make sure the boundaries that we have set, which are work times, right? Let's say our work time is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, that there is a culture in our companies that is 99% of the time, we are going to not send you emails. We're not going to send you texts. We're not going to call you between those hours of 8 to 5 on a weekday, right? Now, there are going to be some crises, and that's okay. But our culture has to be, I'm not even sending you an email if I'm your boss on the weekend. Instead, I'm using which is great, that delay send feature. I can write all the emails I want as a boss, but I can send them at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. I can send later on our text messages and send that and go ahead and write them all if I want to, because I'm crazy and I work all weekend, but don't send them until Monday. Again, respect their time outside of work so their mental health has an opportunity, their minds have an opportunity to decrease and not be on all the time. And then lastly, bullying and harassment have no place in our workplace today. So make sure that if there are people that are creating a really tough culture there, and are making it difficult for people to want to be there, you need to step in with that. It's not a la 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 la, I don't want to hear about it. It is I need to fix this, because there is no place for anger, bullying, and harassment in the workplace. And then I say take the temperature, because you won't know any of these things unless you ask your employees. How is your workload? Do you have acceptable stress? Do you feel like our managers and me are making sure that when you're off, you're off, right? So we're asking them these questions because we don't want the first time we hear about this to have three people quitting at one time or somebody going out because of anxiety, because of things we've unknowingly created at work. So make sure you're taking the temperature. And then once we've done that and we've lowered that stress level and we've known it and we've fixed it, we need to set up programs that's going to help them. An EAP program is an employee assistance program. Many of you may have that as part of your health benefits. And that allows your employees to, for not much extra money, to call in and actually get a therapist assigned that could help them. You don't actually have to be involved at all. They'll call in and actually have a mental health professional help them in an employee assistance program. If you don't have access to those, many small companies just can't do that. Think about things like therapy and counseling. Think about maybe offering one or two therapy or counseling sessions a year to your people. I mean, you may not be able to do all of them, but if you could just show them that it's really important, that you believe that if somebody feels like they need that, that you will reimburse them for one or two of those visits. It's a great benefit that doesn't cost you a lot of money. Require them to take their PTO. In keeping with what I said on the last slide, it seems to be a badge of honor these days, like, oh, Jane likes our company so much that she didn't take her PTO. Well, that needs to look like a negative instead of a positive. We don't need to celebrate those people. We need to celebrate the people that take their PTO because that's how we keep their mental health well, right? And we, as leaders, as owners, need to make sure that we are doing ours, right? So if every time we take PTO, we are on every meeting, we're leaving our family at the beach side and we're making all the calls and everything. We are not setting a great example. So make sure that we're setting the great example of taking our PTO, and the message this January to your employees needs to be take your PTO. If you don't, we're going to be talking to you by the end of the year because we think this is valuable. Sabbatical. If you've ever thought about a great tool to keep people, it's a sabbatical. Whether that's after 7 years or after 10 years of employment with you, you give them an extra certain amount of time off to just recharge and reset. It's amazing how much great productivity that they'll have when they return. And also a great opportunity for them to just reset after they've been with you for a very long time. So be thinking of that. We're seeing more and more of that come in. It's also really great and very sticky for retention. So I know we're talking about mental health today, but a great retention tool and not very costly. Flexible work arrangements. Again, many people that are juggling work and home and kids and older parents and grandkids, they need help, right? They need somebody that, oh, can I come in at 9 today instead of at 8 because I have to take a kid to school or whatever. Make sure that you're being flexible. You don't want to be run over, but you also want to be flexible. Hybrid work. We talk about this a lot. Did you know that 1 or 2 days a week, if you allow people to work from home, they are 12% more productive at their jobs than if you had them there 5 days a week. It also lets them take downtime from driving. And I know that everybody doesn't want to create we'll miss the culture. Well, studies have shown that if you let them work on site 4 days and off 1 day, you actually don't lose any culture, right? You don't lose any of that, but you gain 12% productivity. So think about that. Also, mental health awareness training, things like employee seminars, and making sure that employees and leaders both understand that mental health is something that we don't need to throw under the rug, that we really need to explain to people. Stress reduction programs, like I have a client that has yoga on Wednesdays for all of their lawyers. Meditation, speakers on stress. Again, normalizing that we need to reduce stress, making it not seem like it's taboo or soft, but helping them. And then I love this last one because I said that, we can't really do help with the things that are outside of our control. Somebody may be really stressed out and actually clinically depressed or anxious because of, let's say, their personal finances. Let's say they're in a lot of debt and their spouse lost a job. We can't do a whole lot about that, but maybe we can bring in a speaker on personal finance or aging parents, which seems to be like in my age group, everybody's talking about the stress of all that. So are we allowing ourselves to give them great information to help them? And then, we need to make sure we're training our managers to lead well. Helping them make friends, effective, kind feedback. Are we training our managers? Have you trained your manager? Have you even sent them to any training on how to be a leader? Retrain or fire angry leaders. If you have somebody who's angry, you need to retrain them. If you can't retrain them, you need to let them go because there's no place for that in a workplace. Show gratitude and give praise where acceptable. Make sure they're leaders who can listen. Make sure they've been trained to listen and not just speak. Make sure they're confidential. So if somebody comes to them and says, I'm having a mental health issue, make sure that they know above all else that that doesn't go anywhere else except for maybe these two people that you have said in advance. And then make sure we have empathy. One of the things that it's important for us to do is to express empathy with our leaders and from our leaders to our employees. And I think Trish is going to say a little bit more about that. So, and then role play with your managers. So I'm going to go ahead and send it over to Trisha.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, hi, everyone. And it's kind of funny having the lawyer talk about empathy, but I would argue that it is a very undervalued skill by most lawyers and HR professionals, and it builds a lot of trust, rapport, and credibility with employees. So empathy is your friend, and we're going to talk about it a great deal when we talk about how to respond to requests for accommodation. So let me throw this out there to start with before we jump into this hypothetical. I think Victoria referenced it a minute ago. The newer generations in the workplace, those that are entering the workplace right now, are much more comfortable talking about their mental health than past generations. It used to be taboo to discuss things like depression, anxiety, PTSD. And now it is very commonplace. And what happens is a lot of older managers don't know what to do when an employee comes to them and says, I have depression, I have anxiety, and I need something. Usually they don't use the word accommodation because most folks don't talk in legalese, thank goodness. But they say something like, I have a condition, a mental health condition, and I need some help to do my job, is the gist of what they're saying. And most managers don't know how to respond to that. And back to Cindy's point a minute ago, role play with your managers. So this is, we're going to go through a hypothetical of how you respond when an employee comes to you. And I hate to tell you this, but my prediction is this is here to stay. This is not a blip and people are going to start going back to not discussing mental health. It's here to stay. So our managers need this skill in their toolbox to respond to employees who ask for help. So let's look at our hypothetical. A mid-level employee goes out on a leave. Bear with me, I gotta get this so I can read my own screen. Goes out on a leave due to depression and anxiety, which he claimed was due to stress of the job and micromanagement of the boss. It's always the boss's fault, isn't it? He's been out for a few weeks and his physician has not released him to return to work due to his ongoing depression and anxiety. He says to you, he can return in 2 weeks. And as a manager, you want him back, right? You need him to do the job. The employee is also asking for time off after he returns for future doctor's appointments, to transfer to a new role with a different boss, and to work from home 5 days a week. That's what he believes is a reasonable accommodation. What do? Can you just terminate him, right? Say, we can't do those things. We can't wait 2 weeks for you to come back. We can't give you time off for a doctor's appointment. We can't transfer you to a new role with a nicer boss, and you can't work from home 5 days a week. Can you just terminate him for that? The short answer is no. You can't just terminate him from that. You have to engage in what we're going to talk about in a minute, is the interactive process. You have to get more information about the nature of his disability. You have to, and there are forms we're going to talk about in a minute where you ask the doctor for a medical certification that lists the suggested accommodations. And then you have to engage in what's called an individualized inquiry. That is a specific analysis for his role, this employee's role, the job, and ask yourself, is there any accommodation you can provide? And we're gonna assume for the sake of argument that all of those accommodations you could not provide. That if all of them taken together would be a hardship on you. But the question you need to ask is, are there any I can provide to help him perform the essential functions of the job? All right. So we're gonna get in. So let's take a step back, and then before we get into the practical advice, what we're really talking about here is a request for accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The employee does not have to use those words. He or she just needs to tell you that they have some physical or mental impairment that impairs a major life activity. So the ADA prohibits discrimination based on an employee's disability or perceived disability. A disability is defined as a substantial impairment of a major life activity. Super clear, right? We all know what that is now, correct? Of course not. No, the law is not super clear. But we're going to get into what is a major life activity. The employer has a duty to provide a reasonable accommodation to enable him or her to perform the essential functions of the job. The key word there is essential functions of the job. I guess another key word is reasonable. So those are important. Reasonable is an important adjective because you don't have to provide an accommodation that would render you unable to perform to do your job, run your business, right? You don't have to provide an accommodation that costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't have to provide an accommodation that works a hardship and requires other employees to work overtime and twice as much and every weekend, right? That's not reasonable. But if there is a minor adjustment to the workplace that you can provide, and we're going to talk about some examples in just a minute, that would enable the employee to perform their job, then you should consider it and have a dialogue about it. The defense you have to this duty, if you can't give the employee an accommodation, you're raising what's called the undue hardship defense, that it impacts you as an employer because it causes you a hardship. I will tell you that is a very hard standard to meet. It is not easy for an employer to show undue hardship. It's a very high bar, and you must show that it's relative to the size of the employer. Smaller employers that only have 20 to 50 employees, it's easier to show undue hardship. If you're a publicly traded employer with thousands of employees, it's much harder because not a lot of things should impact you financially. And the law also prohibits harassment and retaliation based on the disability. Next slide. Am I able to advance it? Okay, there we go. This slide is in here, and this needs to be updated, but the 2025 stats aren't out yet. But it's very similar numbers for the 2024. These are the number of EEOC charges filed at the federal level. This does not include state charges. And for the first time after the pandemic, disability discrimination charges beat out race or sex. They are the second most common type of disability of charge filed with the EEOC. And that's significant. And it happened right after the pandemic. The number of disability charges shot up. And I'm sure everyone can guess why that is, right? Because anxiety and depression were off the chart during the pandemic. Gen Z coming into the workplace entered into the workplace about that time as well, and they're much more comfortable talking about it. So it's the things we've been talking about that you are going to have to deal with requests for accommodation, or hopefully not, but maybe you would get a disability EEOC charge at one point that you'll have to defend. So this is not a theoretical issue. It's the whole point of this slide. It is very real, and it happens every day. Next slide. Okay, what is a reasonable accommodation? It's a modification or adjustment in the work environment or in the way things are done that enables qualified individuals to apply for a job, perform the job or gain equal access or to the privileges of the job. So applying for a job, having your website be ADA compliant, so employees can apply for a job as an example. What we're really going to talk about in our hypothetical today is the second prong. The accommodation should enable the employee to perform the job, right? Some possible accommodations. Here are some examples of things that courts generally find are pretty darn reasonable. Altered work schedules, more frequent breaks. So if an employee comes and says, I sometimes have panic attacks and I need to be able to take a break so I can do some deep breathing, I can meditate, I can walk around the block. Chances are that's a reasonable accommodation. It depends on the job, of course. If they are a school teacher and they want to leave the class unsupervised to walk around the block, that wouldn't be reasonable, right? But there are many jobs where that is reasonable. Another example of a reasonable accommodation is time off for medical appointments, right? Without being held against them under a attendance policy. You could, and another accommodation could be accrued paid leave or unpaid leave, right? If all else fails, you could always offer unpaid leave. If the employee says, is asking for an unreasonable amount of accommodations, you can't do those things because it's an undue hardship. You could say, would you like to take an unpaid leave of absence so that you can have more time to heal or more time to seek treatment or more time to, be able to manage your symptoms. And a lot of times that is the bare minimum that you can offer, but a lot of times that's very appreciated and the employee benefits greatly from that and then can come back to work. Work from home could be an accommodation, depends on the job. Obviously, again, back to my school teacher or bus driver example, those won't work. You can't work from home, but there are many jobs today that can. Hybrid schedules. And then here's a key, removing non-essential tasks, right? So if I'll use my school teacher example because everybody is got fond memories of school teachers, or maybe not, but that the teacher comes and says, I just can't deal with unruly children and combative children or children who misbehave. It causes me anxiety and panic. So I need to be not have that as my job duty. I need someone else to do that essential function of my job. That is not reasonable, right? You can't, because that is an essential function of a teacher's job. But if the teacher asks for, I need I need someone to help me with bus duty. I just can't stand because it causes me anxiety. Whatever the scenario is, being near motorized vehicles causes me anxiety. I can't stand in the parking lot and do bus duty. That is probably reasonable accommodation because bus duty is not an essential function of a teacher's job, generally speaking. And this is where your job descriptions are key. If you don't have job descriptions outlining what the essential functions of your job are, you're gonna have a harder time denying accommodation because you need to have very clear essential functions of the job, which is just another word for the key duties and responsibilities of the role. Another option, and this is often one that's overlooked, is reassignment to a vacant role for which the person is qualified, right? You don't need to assign them to a role they don't have the skills for or the qualifications for. But if they can't do the essential functions of their current role, and you have a job opening for a similar role that has different duties, you certainly can offer that as a potential accommodation for the person to consider. You can also send them a list of open vacancies and say, hey, take a look at these vacancies in the company. Do any of these, do you believe you're qualified for any of these? And would any of these enable you to perform the job better than the one you're in, given your disability? So these are all potential accommodations that you could consider. All right. We talked about this first bullet just a minute ago. You don't have to remove an essential function or allow an employee to do less work for the same amount of pay, right? If the employee says, I want to work 3 days a week, but I want to get the same pay as I received when I was working 5 days a week, that is not reasonable. You don't have to do that, nor do you have to just lower quality standards. You don't have to do that as well. That also goes to an essential function of the job, is to do the work in a high quality manner. So those are things you don't have to do. But the most important thing you need to do, and this is what a lot of employers fail at, actually, this is the next slide, is most employers, or not most, a good number of employers, let me say it that way, they do this analysis in their head about what they can and can't provide in an accommodation, and they don't talk to the employee about it. And that is a big mistake. And courts will find you liable just for that, for failing to engage in what the law calls the interactive process, which is a fancy way of saying you need to talk to your employee. And so once an employee comes to you, and I'll give you an example of how this could play out, and this is the second bullet here, and the employee says, because of my disability, I'm having trouble performing this duty of my job, and I need some help. That then triggers you as the employer to engage in the interactive process. So a good response would be, it's not the only response, but it's a good one. I'm so sorry to hear that you're having this difficulty. Thank you for sharing it with me. I, of course, will keep it confidential. But I'd like to learn more about this so we can figure out how we can assist you if it's possible. And at that point, you would hand the employee a form. And the form comes right out of the regulations. And the form is for him or her to take to their doctor to have the doctor fill it out. And the key point here is you don't have to take the employee's word for it, because I hear that complaint all the time. What if the employee's making it up? What if the employee's exaggerating? What if they are really not disabled at all? And that could be true, but it is not our job to determine that. And I think Cindy said that a minute ago. It is not our job to decide that. We are not medical professionals. Our job is to give them the form that says, here's the medical certification. Have your doctor fill this out and bring it back to me. And then let's sit down and have a conversation about what your doctor is recommending for an accommodation and what we're able to provide. And so it is a slow process, I'll be honest with you. So usually it takes a week or two, sometimes 3, sometimes a month, but eventually you'll get the papers back. And then you sit down and have a conversation with the employee about what the potential accommodations are. That is the most important thing an employer can do, and it is absolutely required. So that is I pretty much covered all that already. But here are the big mistakes to avoid. And managers avoid this, especially if they're not trained. To Cindy's point about training your managers, they don't understand that they have a duty here, especially when the employee comes to them. They think it's just informational. They have a duty. So the big mistakes are failing to recognize a reasonable accommodation request. The employee does not have to use those words. Another big mistake is failing to consider leave as an accommodation. If you can't offer anything else, offer an unpaid leave, if possible, to help the employee heal and recover. Another big mistake is failing to recognize that mental conditions such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, Victoria, help me, I'm sure there's many others I'm not thinking of.
ADHD,
panic attacks. Sure, that falls under a different bucket, but that those could be disabilities, so that you have to take them seriously. Another big mistake is failing to engage in the interactive process. I just described it for you on the last slide. After you engage in it, document it, right? Write yourself a note, send an email documenting that conversation occurred. And then lastly, just say no. If you just say no, we can't do that. You can't do what you're asking. It's not reasonable and it's an undue hardship, and failing to come up with an alternative accommodation. If you do that, you are much better off than if you just say no. All right.
All right, I'm going to jump in here at the end, and here's a few more stats to know. 55% of CEOs have experienced a negative mental health issue within the past year. So this is important as owners and leaders in your company to know that the CEO stress and managers who are stressed, it's unique. 77% of CEOs reported experiencing high levels of stress. And then a 2021 study showed that CEO lifespans decreased by 18 months solely due to the stress of an economic downturn. So, as business owners and executives, there is a unique type of stress because you're carrying the weight of the company. So here's where I want to switch it a little bit to how do we handle that stress as leaders in the company? And I also want to talk about, we talked earlier about the definition of mental illness. So I want to give you the definition of mental health. It's a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community, closely linked to physical health. So when I'm mentally healthy, I can experience a full range of emotions. I can feel sad and still be mentally healthy. I can feel angry and still be mentally healthy. I can feel scared and still have and still be basically mentally healthy. I'm going to go to the next slide. So burnout is not really a medical condition, but it can be coded as a contributing factor to a medical diagnosis, and it can raise the risk of depression and other health concerns. It was actually coined in 1974, and it's defined as the extinction of motivation or incentive, especially where one's devotion to a cause or a relationship fails to produce the desired results. And it's a reaction to a prolonged job stress, includes exhaustion, cynicism, can't even read my own slides here, but a reduced professional ability. So I think if you've lived long enough on this earth, you kind of know what burnout is. And we have caregiver burnout when we're caring for maybe a child, a parent, or a spouse with a chronic illness. We have employee burnout when they don't see the bigger picture of what the vision is, and they just feel like I have to do this widget every single day and I'm burnt out on it. And then we have CEO burnout, which is the type where you feel you're carrying the weight of the company. So I want to talk about some practical ways that we can lower stress. First thing is we all have what I like to describe as a window of tolerance. So if you picture this window, within this window, you feel basically mentally healthy. If a challenge comes your way, you're like, all right, I'm going to face it, I'm going to dig my heels in, and we're going to deal with this. But sometimes when we get emotionally stressed, people can respond and they're not really choosing these responses. These responses are happening on a physiological level and they can act out or check out. And I like to think of it as acting out is like you're going out the top of the window. This is going to look like angry outburst. Well, I can't have those spreadsheets on time. I can't believe this deadline. They're giving me all this. And it's just angry outbursts. Face is turning red. They're forming a fist and they don't even realize it. Or it could be that, acting out is they're shaking uncontrollably because they're so fearful of something that's going to happen. You can also go out this bottom part of the window of tolerance. Sometimes people just get so overwhelmed, they check out, they zone out. The medical term might be they dissociate. They don't respond to emails, nobody's heard from them, they're taking these long breaks, they're not answering text, they are zoned out, checked out. They may oversleep. They're showing up late repeatedly. They're checking out early. So as a leader in your business, be aware of your own window of tolerance. Be aware of your go-to. Am I one that goes out the top of the window, or am I one that kind of slides out the bottom? So just be aware of your own. And then the second thing I want to help you in is how they actually train our U.S. military snipers. So when you think about a sniper, this person has to make very critical decisions under a lot of pressure. And that is exactly what we see in business leaders. You have to make very critical decisions, and a lot of times the conditions are not great and it can be very pressurizing. So, what they do, a sniper cannot hold his position forever unless he has some training. So, one of the trainings is to ground yourself using your five senses. So, I start with helping people feel their feet on the ground, press into your toes, press into your heel. Feel the weight of your feet on the ground. Then notice, what do I see visually? What you're doing is you're bringing the awareness to the present moment, noticing what you see. Describe it, the color, the texture. What do I smell? Do I notice anything that I'm smelling? What can I hear? What can I touch? So this is bringing you back to the present. The next thing is the abdominal breathing. So if you put your hand right where your ribs come together on your diaphragm, you want to breathe so that your hand moves away from your body. So it's not about your shoulders and your upper body and your lungs going like, like this. It's about your belly kind of moving a little bit away and then back down. In through the nose, slow and steady. This is going to allow your mind to think more clearly. It's going to allow your heart rate to slow down. And the last is a relaxed muscle body. Back to that sniper. If you think of the sniper, you cannot have a tense sniper. That's a bad combination, because then anything that moves is going to get shot, right? No, we cannot have tension. So a lot of times in mental health, we've said, "Oh, just think I'm not stressed and then I won't be stressed." Well, that doesn't really happen. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you think, don't be stressed, don't be stressed, don't be stressed. Now you're stressed because you can't stop yourself from being stressed. There's another approach. We want to go from the bottom up. So if we relax our muscles, and this takes practice, but if you can learn to stand they train snipers with a relaxed muscle body, what that's doing is your muscles are sending signals to your brain. They're saying it's safe. I got this. I'm relaxed. I'm going to make the right call. Instead of having to say, chill out, figure it out, don't worry. Let your muscles send the signal to your brain. So you have to practice relaxing your muscles in times when you're not stressed, so that when you get stressed, you can get back into that mode, so that your muscles are sending a signal to your brain. We're going to be all right. I know what to do. I'm going to get the consultation I need to. I'm going to talk to the people, going to have the conversation, but my stress is lowered. So those are just a few practical grounding skills, especially before you have to go into, a stressful environment.
Victoria, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So if we have leaders on the phone right now, or people on the phone that see that their window of tolerance, maybe it used to be here, and that things that used to impact me and I used to be able to handle them. You said in the window of tolerance, you're happy, you're sad, you are angry, but all of a sudden you feel like things are making you a lot angry faster. And so I'm guessing that means your window of tolerance is shrinking.
Yes.
What do I do if I'm a leader and I'm very functional, but how do I make that window of tolerance larger? What are I know one thing that is important to do that I've done is go to see a therapist like you. What are the ways and can that window of tolerance be broadened?
Absolutely, it can. And this is where number one, talking about it with a trained professional would be the best, but talking about it, even with a close friend, would be so important because when you have to put words to something that's only existed in your head, that's helping you. And then you're also hearing yourself say it. So that window of tolerance can definitely shrink in times of stress. And we all have different stressors in our life. And so verbally processing it with someone else really helps. Also, journaling is very effective. Journaling out, and there again, it's getting those feelings and emotions out into language. Sometimes that helps you to get that window of tolerance back in a healthier place.
Awesome. And so, what do we do? I'll bring Trisha up on this one too. If we have an employee that we see that seems to be exhibiting signs of anxiety or depression, I would say from an HR perspective, please do not say that to them. Like, oh, I'm thinking you might be anxious or depressed. Like, we don't want to say that. We are not medical professionals. We don't want to say that. But you can say, okay, Jane, I see your work, because we can look at work output and I see, you're coming in late every day. I'm seeing that what you normally produce a week, you're not doing, with more and more errors. Can we talk about that? Right. But we don't want you, and Trisha, I'm guessing, can you chime in on this one? We do not want you to say, I feel like you're depressed and you need to go see a therapist.
Right. Oh, absolutely not. Right. We talked earlier, you answered it exactly the right way. You always focus on the work or the performance that's not happening. Our job is not to pretend we're doctors. I know it's tempting at times. I've done it myself, but we're not doctors. We shouldn't try to diagnose the employee and speculate they may have something. Just say, we noticed that your work has declined. We're noticing that your attendance has become very spotty. We noticed that you just seem very unhappy to be here. Is there anything we could do to assist you? Is kind of the way to approach it, rather than to, and we would never mandate anyone go see a therapist. That's not advisable.
Yeah, and it's also not advisable for us to jump in and say, oh, you have a depression diagnosis. So does my friend Jan, and this is what she did to make herself feel better. I'm an employer, I'm a boss, and
Right.
I do not need to jump in and give any mental health advice because that could take us down a legal bad road, right?
Right.
Just like you wouldn't tell people which type of chemo to use because we are business people. We are not medical doctors. So again, the same way with mental health, it is as Victoria and Tricia said, it's so easy to make those look different. Like mental health has one set of requirements and physical health has a different one, but what we're saying here is it's the same, right? And so whatever you wouldn't do and wouldn't talk about and wouldn't suggest with physical health issues, you wouldn't do that with mental health issues either. So just wanted to clarify those things. And thanks, Trisha and Victoria, for using your expertise a little bit. I don't know that we have time for questions because I think we're done right at 1. Sarah, can you help me on that one?
Yes, that is correct. So I'll go ahead and kind of wrap us up. I appreciate all 3 of you sharing all of your expertise. And I'd like to thank everyone who joined us for a full hour today and took time out of your workday to really be present and work on yourself. So if you found
Sarah?
this valuable, I encourage you to subscribe to our Roots and Legacies newsletter so that you will not miss future programs and conversations like this. So
Hey,
thank
Sarah,
you.
we will go ahead and if it's okay with you, we'll share these slides with you to send to everybody. And so they
Yes.
can use those slides as they want to talk about their company or whatever. And Victoria and Trisha and I, on the last page of these slides, you'll see our contacts. And so you're welcome to contact us about anything. Victoria also does training at companies in case you want to do some stress and reduction reducing stress training and talking to leaders and those kind of things. And Trisha knows all things from an employment law perspective. So anyway, if there's any way we can be of help to you guys, we will be. And thank you so much for giving us the time.